So that is tip number one. Let's go on to tip number two. Yeah, guys, sorry for being late. Had a problem out on the floor. Oh, hey, maintenance manager, why don't you come and join us? You're a little late and we've already gone over one of the tips, but come on in. Well, I was standing out at the machine, it was going, woo, woo. So, obviously I had to stay out there. Yeah, well, we've all been there before. Some cases I have used social media as ways to bubble up information, especially to workers' comp, about what the employee may be doing outside of work. And furthermore, what they were doing while they're on short-term disability or long-term disability. Now, listen, I'm not trying to pry into people's lives. I'm certainly not going in deep diving information, but if they are offering up information freely on Facebook or Instagram or whatever the new things are, because I'm old, I'm using that information at least to help me determine whether this thing is work-related or not. Now, unfortunately, in many of these cases, it doesn't matter. You could even have somebody, and I had a situation not too long ago where someone claimed a shoulder injury at work. There really wasn't much risk for the task that they were doing. And at the end of the day, he's posting that his aluminum siding business, and I didn't even know people did aluminum siding anymore, his aluminum siding business was going gangbusters. And this is something that every summer he'd have somehow a shoulder injury, and yet for that 3 or 4 months, his business was doing really, really well. So I could tell he was using his shoulders outside of work. And yet, even then, in the workers' comp court case, the employee said, yes, I was doing these things outside of work, but at the end of the day, my shoulder was hurting really, really bad. I could barely move it at the end of the day. I was just doing it enough to make money for my family. And let's face it, again, this is a court case. There's a judge there. In most cases, he's going to rule with the employee that they are trying to help themselves out. They are trying to produce for their family. They are going to rule for the employee. So again, that's why it's one of the bottom tier on the list. It's helpful. Again, that's something I'd probably give to workers' comp as information, but in many cases, it's not very helpful from a standpoint of you use that as your smoking gun, and yes, it is not work-related. And in some cases, workers' comp will hire a PI, right, a private investigator, to see what that employee is doing. Now, I don't think you should ever do that as a company. Use your workers' comp group to see if that is an appropriate measure. That's why those workers' comp lawyers are there, to figure out what you can do within the confines of the law and what you can't. Number 3, be careful what you document, and or be careful what you don't document. Perfect example I can give you is we had an employee at one point in time that hurt themselves at work, legitimate case, and the supervisor gave them the rest of the day off, right? Just because we wanted to help them out. They wanted to make sure that they could actually do the work, wanted to get them back the next day. Well, the employee called up the supervisor the next day and said, yeah, I'm still hurting. The supervisor said, well, take this day off too. And wrote it down in documentation saying they took that next day off after the injury because they were hurt. Now, I could argue that that supervisor is not a medical person. They're not giving days off. The unfortunate part is the way the OSHA rules are written, it doesn't matter. If a supervisor or even somebody who's not educated medically wants to give them an extra day off, and that is part of their job, then that is considered days away from work, and now you got to take that, and especially now days away from work, a lost time incident. So again, in many of these cases, you need to educate your employees what to document, what not to document. Now, I'm not saying lie by any means. Don't do that. But ensure what you're documenting is appropriate and necessary. In this case, the supervisor could have gone out and said, we wanted to give this employee a day off for a vacation. And that's what it was. It was supposed to be a vacation day, but he wrote down as a vacation day so the employee could rest up from an injury. You can't write that down, and now the documentation says they had an injury, they needed another day off potentially, so now we had to take it as a lost time injury again. So ensuring that documentation and what you do document is correct, and don't document anything superfluous that is not necessary. Another thing, and again, some people may morally or ethically not agree with this, and I'm not saying you always use it. You determine whether you want to use this one or not, but don't go searching for documentation if it doesn't exist, right? So I had an employee one time said, hey, I had this incident that happened on Friday. I went on Saturday to the ER. They gave me a prescription, and I just wanted to let you know. So I said, okay, well, provide me the documentation, and then we'll figure it out from there. He never gave me the documentation. All I had was his word. Again, if I don't have a doctor's note saying that this is what happened, I'm not going to document down, yes, they got a prescription. Again, I don't know that they got a prescription. And the other thing is, in many of these cases, I can't call up an ER and say, hey, I'm an employer, I need this information, if the employee never said it was a work-related case to begin with. So honestly, my hands are tied. And if the employee does not want to give me the information, there's nothing I can really do. I could ask him again and again and again if I wanted to, but at the end of the day, if he's not going to provide it to me, it's one of those things where I'm not going to document down anything that he has not provided to me in writing. And in a lot of these cases, you got to treat it like finance. Don't write down any funny numbers that you don't need to. Am I right? I'm talking about cooking the books, buddy. What are you talking about? I don't cook the books. May preheat them a little, but... And there it is. The last of the lowest tier is going to be work-related documentation you have that's outside of the EHS, right? So if somebody has a quality problem, somebody has an HR problem, somebody's having production issues, if they're just all around a bad employee, helpful to document, helpful to know, but at the end of the day, that is really very, again, similar to the social media, it's pretty useless. Good information to have, again, could be part of the case. You could talk about being a disgruntled employee and something happened right then and there, and then right afterwards they claimed a work-related injury, or you were put them on a particular job they didn't want to do, and right afterwards they somehow had a work-related injury. Yes, again, information is helpful to have, but very little that's going to be useful except for maybe as piece of documentation for workers' comp to use to see if it's work-related and or non-work-related. All right, tier 2. We're getting on to number 5. Accommodations for lost time and or restrictions. Now, again, this is more less about recordability, more lost time or restriction time. However, it is information you need to know because OSHA does not say if they can't do 100% of their job, then it's considered restricted time, right? In some cases, the only thing I have that could be potentially OSHA recordable is whether they have a little bit of lost time or restricted time. So if we can accommodate the restrictions as best as possible and within the confines of that employee's job, that is generally what's best from an OSHA perspective, especially from a restricted case standpoint. What they say is if an employee cannot do every single, quote, routine function of their job, then it would be considered a restricted case. Now, what does that mean? They also give a little bit more follow-up documentation saying basically any type of job they do potentially once a week. Now, sometimes from a shift perspective, if you have swing shifts, right, they come in for 4 days and then they're off for 5 days and they come back in. Basically, that week-long time frame could potentially help you or harm you, right? So that is something you just got to think about is, can they do their same basic job when they come back or not? And again, like I said before, some of this is really, really good to document and some of it's not. I'm a personal believer in ensuring you document as much as possible. So if you have functional job profiles or you say, hey, this is exactly what the job entails, and generally it comes from HR or somebody like in production saying exactly what the job is supposed to be and here are all the tasks that they do. Most of the time that is going to be very, very helpful. And it's even better sometimes if you can provide it to the doctor that is treating the employee. So you can say, hey, listen, if we can make sure that they can do all of these jobs and they can lift these potential weights and they can do this thing above their shoulder and then stand on their head and dance around, then they can do most of their routine functions of their job. All of that is helpful to have. However, I have been in certain situations where they didn't document that. They just didn't have that documentation there. They had really, really generalized rules of what people did. That did help. Not saying that's the best practice. It really isn't. I think documentation is best because here's the thing. I find it helpful to ensure employees know exactly what they're doing for the routine job because you can use that as a potential hiring piece, right? So if you see somebody who comes in here and it says, hey, they got to be able to lift 50 pounds 10 times a day, and they look like they're somebody who cannot lift 50 pounds 10 times a day, you can automatically potentially screen them out of a job. So that way they would never have an ergo case to begin with, right? So again, best practice is to document that and ensure you have employees who can do the job before they come in. But in some cases, I have been helped or hindered by that documentation. So it's just one of those things if you have, it's great, but you got to make sure that now those restrictions fit within that job, or in some cases, if you don't have it documented, you have a little bit of leeway to figure that out yourself. But again, make sure you're staying on an ethical and moral line here. I'm telling you this stuff can help, but don't play in the gray too much. Again, you could be potentially caught and you don't want that black eye on your career.